My Life Now is a half-hour podcast show which regularly features reviews of new releases and all-time classics of both traditionally published and self-published books.
Tune in for special guest interviews and, of course, helpful tips to not only write your next book, but also to help market it.
My Life Now is most often referred to as a great way for authors to get quality exposure and avid readers to discover their next read.
Without further delay, here's another stimulating episode of My Life Now.
Welcome back to another episode of My Life Now. Once again, my name is Dallas here. We have another amazing author joining us today. His name is Gunther Allen. Gunther, pleasure to have you here today from Texas.
Thank you for having me. I'm here in Leander, Texas.
Leander, Texas. All right. I've never heard of Leander, but you said it's outside of Austin.
Just outside of Austin.
Great. Well, it's great to have you here today. We're going to be talking about your book titled Pushed Out of the Closet Without a Parachute. So we're going to be talking about that today. But before we get into that, I just want to let you give the audience an overview of who you are, Gunther. You say you're in Austin. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your life.
I'm in Southern California, born and raised. I grew up in Downey, California. And after that, I became a lifeguard and a surfer in California and decided to move to Hawaii. So I lifeguarded in Hawaii for about 10 years. And after that, came back to finish school in Long Beach, California, whereas the book sort of starts taking off in the 80s. And it's sort of my life that started to come and to discover myself, who I was, what I was, as far as being gay. Back then, it was a lot different than it is today. You just didn't come out of the closet that easy. And there was different stages of me coming out, from basically letting people know that we're friends, but not my parents or family, which happens in this book. And that's why the title, Pushed Out of the Closet Without a Parachute, kind of gives, I don't want to give away the whole story, but it's sort of what happens, how I was pushed out. This is before people were shaming people by coming out, because it wasn't a thing back then. But after that, there was lots of times where they would just expose people, making sure that people would be, outed. But that wasn't really the case. It was sort of circumstances that caused it to be that I was in every newspaper in the world for a few weeks. And it was like, oh my God, what do I do now?
And you said Hawaii. Which island were you on?
I started on the island of Oahu. I had a good friend that I used to surf with in California, and she lived in Makaha. And I went to visit her, and this is back in the late 70s. And I just knew I had to get over there and ride the big waves like she was doing.
Oh, yeah.
She happened to be best friends with Rel Sun, who was the world's famous, the top women's surfer at the time. And, if you don't know the Big Island, Oahu that well, but that side of the island is pretty local. You don't see a lot of tourists over there. Back then, hardly any. And any haole with blonde hair would, be killed if he was out there alone. But I was taken in as family, or what they called ohana back there, and went out and surfed with them. Almost got killed my first day out there.
It's no joke over there.
It's in the part of the, it happened to be right when the big swells were hitting around Christmas time, and went out there, and I started paddling out to the left in the reef, and I saw a shark fin, and I said, oh shoot, death by shark or death by big waves. So I chose the big waves.
Neither are great options there. Neither are great options. So I don't want to take away from the book, but what is your favorite beach in Honolulu? Do you have one?
Oh, I was doing a lot of body surfing there too. So Makapu and Sandy's were
Makapu was my favorite beach. That's my favorite beach for sure. Makapu.
But Hanauma Bay was one of the beaches I guarded before. It's now a preserve, and you have to get permission to go in. You have to go through this whole understanding about the reef and not stepping on it. And you take this little lecture or a little show before they even let you go in there. But back then, it was different. It was incredible in the day. There were so many more fish and things that you take for granted were there, but they're no longer there.
Now that we're done reminiscing, we can go back into the book here. So, push out of the closet without a
Okay.
parachute. what is the what is the purpose for writing this book? So you experienced these things, but what made you want to put it into a book and tell people about your story?
Well, it's a memoir. It's a true story about my life at that point. And at that point in my life, I was going through, like I said, a lot of changes. And I just graduated from Long Beach State. It took me 6 years because I kept on changing my major, but I finally got a degree in voice and a BA in music. And I had been commissioned to write a musical, or co-write a musical, I should say, in the area. They were closing down all the schools because of baby boomers being, they didn't have the need. There weren't that many kids anymore, so they were just kind of basically closing a lot of the high schools down. And so they went to Long Beach State because it was one of the closest universities in the area, and said, "Listen, can you guys get some of your best music, members that to put a musical together?" Well, I wrote music, so they came up to me and said, "Listen, let's get you guys to write this." We toured the entire Los Angeles area, playing at all the schools, and we reviewed in the Times and everything. And the reason I mention this is because the way I serendipitously met RockHudson was at the time when I was going to school, I was also being a waiter, and I was painting the inside of the tuna can, which is basically the sports arena where they were going to hold the Olympics in '84. And this was in 1983 when we met. So the book starts out there where I was painting the inside of the sports arena, and I had a brush with death as I was on the 70-foot ladder on the top of the building. It's a round building, and they told me to paint the corner. That was kind of ironic. But I went on the top, and I didn't have a fear of heights. Being a lifeguard, I jumped off of the pier and all this other stuff. So I got on the ladder, and all of a sudden, one of the feet came off the ladder, and I'm here in the corner. They saved me, and I got down. Nothing happened, but I decided that was my last brush with being a painter.
Stop living on the edge.
And next door, they were opening up the Hyatt Regency. Yeah. Which I humorously talk about in the book, and talk about my Paulesque phase in life where I decided to be this avant-garde painter with paint splattered all over the sports arena on the floor. But, I just said, this is not for me. I started interviewing for a position as banquet waiter, the Hyatt Regency, which I got right when they opened. And that's how circumstances happened. We were having a big event, and we got late, and one of my friends said, "Gunther, you got to go over to the Silver Fox and get an Alabama Slammer." And I said, "What the heck is that?" And he says, "Well, he's telling me I had to go." And he talked me into going, and it was a Tuesday night. It was dead. There's about 4 people on the bar, and one of those people was RockHudson. I couldn't believe it, but my friend Phil, he actually knew RockHudson. He had been his waiter in Disneyland at the private club that they have there. And he walks up to him, and he waves me over, and he introduces me. And so he asked me, "What do you do?" And I just told him I'm, was a student. I just graduated. I just did this musical. And he just said, "Oh, do you play, at private events and stuff?" I said, "Oh yeah, I do troubadour style. I do weddings. I do everything." He said, "Well, I'm doing a party this weekend. Would you like to play?" And I said, "Sure. I'd love to." And I'm here like, God, RockHudson's asked me to play it, but he hasn't heard me play. So I actually, in the bar, sang the chorus of the music, one of the songs in the musical that I wrote. And so I wouldn't have done it if there were people in the bar, but there was only, like I said, 3 other people besides him, and one of them was his good friend Dean Dittman. So I played the song, and he says, "No, I'd like you to come and sing for me." So I went to this party. I ended up, not sure what to expect. And it was not at Rock's place, but it was at his best friend Dean Dittman's house. And we got there. Well, I got there. I sat down and said, "Where should I play?" And he goes, hold on. It's way too early. And it was about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock then. And I said, "Okay." We waited till midnight, and then it was so loud in the place. He says, "Nah, it's too loud. Just wait." Well, short story. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when he finally asked me to play, and I played a song, and he stopped after the first song, which is a whale song that I played. And he apologized to me. And I said, what do you mean? Why are you apologizing to me? And he said, well, frankly, I thought you were going to be crappy. I didn't think you'd be this good. And I said, well, he says, I could never do what you do. And I said, what are you talking about? You get in front of people on a stage, you get in front of people in cameras. And he says, it's different. You're sitting here amongst people you've never met before. You just get out and sing, and so what he said to me is he apologized. He says, I want you to come back in 2 weeks. We're gonna throw a party just to showcase you. And I started to play in Hollywood in front of a bunch of famous people. I mean, I can tell you the names and stuff, but it's back. Most people wouldn't recognize the names, but if you remember MASH and some of the older movies, Mary Hartman, Dottie Goodman, she was the mother of Mary Hartman in that show, and she also was in with Daryl Hannah and Splash. She was kind of the crazy lady in that, and these people were like overwhelmed. They thought that I had enough talent to make it. And bottom line, the book goes through my whole story of going back and forth in different events, which are hysterical. There were some things that happened. I don't want to spoil the book, but were hilarious. Rock was a fun person who loved to laugh at the silliest jokes, dirty jokes, you name it. And I just happened to have this 94-year-old neighbor where I lived in Laguna Niguel, who had a treasure trove of jokes that she worked for New Yorker magazine, and she just told me all of these jokes, and I would pull them out, and I was like being the entertainer, like sort of like the gesture and musician of the court, kind of thing. Huh. And so this is my story about that, and then the tragic events that occurred towards the final year of his life. And one major part of the story is that he actually came and stayed in Hawaii with my parents and I. But anyhow, I'm not letting you ask any questions, so I'll let you go ahead.
No, tell your story.
Okay. So my parents lived on the Big Island, which is, you asked me, what islands I was in Hawaii. I was mainly on Oahu, but I got this opportunity when I was lifeguarding to buy a house on the Big Island at a good price. I kept on, asking around. It was my dream to have a house there. And there was an opportunity to buy this house from this Portuguese woman, which was on the Big Island of Hawaii, which this is the Pahoa side, which is the south side of the Hilo side of the island, in a place called Leilani Estates. You probably remember a couple of years ago where they had the big eruptions happening. That was a block down from the house that I owned, which actually didn't get destroyed, but it got covered in ash. The people that bought the house from me still live there. So anyhow, I said, it was around Easter time, and I told Rock that I was going to go visit my parents on Hawaii, because my parents had moved into the house and I went back to school. And so they were retired over there. It's a long story I won't get into, but he said, well, I can't go to Hawaii. And I said, why can't you? Oh, that Jim Neighbors thing. And I said, I don't know how many of your viewers would know the story, but it was the Hollywood back then. They would groom their actors, meaning that they would pay for anything that they needed, horseback riding lessons, anything that you can imagine. They would groom their actors so they would be perfect for the parts. Unlike today, where they're basically looking for somebody to fit the part. At that time, he was good friends with a lot of other actors, and one of them happened to be Jim Neighbors. And they were just friends, nothing more. There was no romantic at that point. Everybody was still in the closet, so nobody talked about it anyhow. Mm-hmm. But there was these two men that threw a party in, this was in California, at Hermosa Beach. And, on the day back then, everybody threw these theme parties, the black party, the white party, the Western cowboy party. Well, somebody thought it'd be a great idea. Why don't we do a wedding party? Well, who would come to a wedding? Oh, we'll just make it up. RockHudson and Jim Neighbors getting married. But they didn't say their names. They said something of somebody being like the Rock of Gibraltar marrying somebody that is a good neighbor. So everybody read between the lines and knew what it was. Well, somebody gave one of the invitations to Rona Barrett, who was a big Gotham columnist back in the day. And she was going to expose the whole thing. Of course, Rock and Jim both denied it, but it was, they threw people under the bus to save other people there then. And apparently, one of the other actors that was, becoming famous, they threw under the bus for him. And I won't mention his name because the book's not out, and this is all hearsay as far as I know. Mm-hmm. So basically saved him. He ended up marrying his, he had already been married to his secretary, who almost exposed him being gay years before that in the 60s. But back then, that would have ruined any actor's career. So he got married. He stayed with Phyllis for 3 years. I asked him if he, was that fake or real? And he told me, oh, no, we were best friends too. And, I loved her and we tried to make it work, but it just, after 3 years, they ended it. And I'm sure you could get Phyllis's book and she could tell her side of the story. But all I know is I asked him one time, who were the people in your life that you actually loved? And one of the three that he mentioned was Phyllis. Anyhow, I was saying how he got to Hawaii. I told him about my parents there. And I said, well, they live on a different island, not the same island that Jim Neighbors lives on. So you can come to Hilo and fly in, and they're in the middle of nowhere. So nobody's going to bother you. So he said, why not? He asked me, he drilled me. He asked me not questions about me, but my parents, what are they like? What would they think of me coming over there? And I said, back then, I'm an only child. I used to bring people to Hawaii all the time from my chorus groups, people at school, swimming people on my canoe teams. I just say, oh, this is, and they're like, they just loved me coming in to visit them, and they loved the people that I brought. But when I told my parents, oh, I'm bringing RockHudson, that was...
Yeah, I'm sure. They're like, wow.
I gotta say, it caused a little sweaty palms.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, we didn't call him Rock, we called him Roy. Roy Scherer is his real name, and it's his alter ego. And he compartmentalized his life, where he'd be one type of person to somebody and completely different to my parents. So he just cherished the time to being on the island, being alone with my parents. And we did mundane things, just going around, looking at, the sites, taking him to the volcano house, showing him the Black Beach, things like that. And he was there for about a week. And then he said, your parents are so nice. Let me do something for them. Let me take them out for Easter. And I said, okay. I said, but we don't have a lot of choices here on the Big Island. And he says, well, what would you suggest? And we went to the Hyatt Regency. I think it was called the Hyatt back then. It's changed names several times. Went there, and it was like my parents, we were in shock, because as soon as we got there, they found out it was Rock. He had booked the appointment and got a special area. He said we didn't want to be where we could be bothered. Well, it wasn't the case. We were bothered by people coming constantly asking for autographs, and it was like they were acting giddy, and like he was, this is a big thing for Hilo. So we had a crowd of maybe 100 people waiting to see him. He was very good about please let us eat our brunch, and then afterwards I will sign anybody's and autograph my autograph and stuff. And my mom was very German, and my goodness, why do they do this? I could never live like this. And I said, well, Mom, it was another case where he was, when he was staying at the house, where he go, Gunther, you and I had your mom made dinner, you and I will wash the dishes. And she turned to me and she said, I never knew a movie star that did dishes. I said, Mom, you never knew a movie star, period.
Right, so, right.
But that's the kind of guy that he was. And my story is exposing the more Roy Scherer side of him, the part that was genuine. And not that I'm saying that he wasn't genuine, but he was an actor, and he put on a show for everybody in Hollywood. He had he would even go as far as going to Christmas parties or New Year's parties where he'd go to multiple parties so he could expose his different sides of himself. He'd go to the Hollywood party where, he would call it the A list, but he'd secretly call it the B list because he said, I really like the other people better, but this is, what I do for my career, for his acting career. And I got to know him probably better than most people. At one point, he told me that there was only two people he trusted to tell, to be honest about himself with, and I was one of them. And I was very honored for him to say that. He would tell me about his whole relationship with MarcChristian, which ended up being something that I got involved with in the book. And what ended up happening was after Rock had passed away from AIDS, and the whole thing's been documented in many books, but I don't go through anything about the whole tragedy of it except for the memorial service, because I was there. I was invited. I got a special telegraph from Elizabeth Taylor inviting me to come. And I went with Dean Dittman. We went together, and it was surreal. It was probably the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced in my life. We came in the limo, and they spat upon us, and other people applauded us. And there were gay activists. There were people that were anti-gay. There were, people that were praying for him that he would, just renounce his sexuality. It was just bizarre. There were helicopters flying over. So I sat 4 seats down from Carol Burnett, and I was watching her a lot because what was one of Rock's best friends, and I thought, my goodness, I would like to really talk to her of anybody there, but unfortunately, she left right after the immediate service. There was a party afterwards where I met, Susan St. James, just Angie Dickinson, Ricardo Montalban. I mean, just the top of the A-list back of actors at the time. But it wasn't the actors I was interested in. I wanted to find out. That was the first time also I had been to the castle, which was the nickname for Rock's place. And I had given him a tape of some of my music, but I never knew if he got that tape. And the side line to that is that when I did the tape, I had laryngitis, but Dean and we personalized the tape. We were telling our jokes on there. And even though I sounded like a frog when I was singing, I didn't want it to get out in public. So I was trying to get that tape. And so Dean took me and gave me the tour of the bedroom that he passed away in. And I mean, we're opening up the drawers in the bedroom, and the syringes are there, and all the signs of his last year, moments of his struggle. And the tape was in the dresser drawer, which I took along with some pictures of us in Hawaii. And I didn't want him to get in the wrong hands, especially MarcChristian. Right. But I ended up meeting Marc after that episode. We got out of the room and we went back out to join some people, and I saw Marc, and I decided just to say hello. He hadn't a clue who I was. And he asked for my number. He said he'd like to talk to me and give me his side of the story. So I said, okay, kind of that kind of person. I want to, listen to both sides before I can decide what the truth is. And I already knew that Rock had compartmentalized his life, that, I didn't know for sure if everything he told me was, just one, which story it was. Bottom line, not to get too far ahead in the story, but we ended up, after being on the phone for many times, I don't know, like a month worth of calls back and forth, we got together. Marc kind of made the move on me, and we ended up having a little relationship. I'd say little because it was actually 2 times that we got intimate together. And then I found out just shortly after that, he ghosted me. I didn't get any answers to the phone calls. And I found out that he was suing the property for $14 million. And I was used. I was totally manipulated. He used me to find out whatever I knew to see if there was any threat to his case. And Marvin Mitchelson was his lawyer. They were on TV, and I was like, oh, never heard from him. And that was 1985. Rock passed in October of 1984, and so that happened in 1985, right after we got together in December. And so the early part of the year, I talked to one of my clients. I was a personal trainer at the time, and I started my own business that I ran for almost 20 to 30 years. And it was all, all in the book. I tell all about how all these things occurred and how I became a personal trainer. It was because of Rock, also because at that point he was going to try to get me to have a music career, but it didn't happen. So I decided I needed to make some money, and was working at gyms at the time. Ended up teaching aerobics classes, and after that, somebody asked me, "Would you come to my house?" So I don't like these kids here are younger, but I want somebody that will train me at my house doing this class. Could you do that? Mm-hmm. And bottom line, again, here I am, the first personal trainer in Orange County. And the reason I say that is because I was featured in Entrepreneur Magazine, because they found out I was the first person that they found that advertised my business. So in 1991, I was featured in Entrepreneur Magazine. But by then my business had taken off. And this whole thing with Rock and MarcChristian was just so, I didn't want to get involved. Okay, it was a circus. And so of course they called me and they asked me what I knew, and I said it was all hearsay information. I had never seen Rock or MarcChristian together, so I couldn't really, I said, I don't know what I could add that anybody else that, as a good friend from Rock, could tell you. So they didn't use me in the case. But then in 1989, I'm at a party in Laguna Niguel, and we're sitting there, and they have the TV screen in the back, and somebody says, "Turn on the volume." It's MarcChristian and his new lawyer, and they awarded him $21 million. And he goes up there and says, "I can never, ever be with another guy because I fear that, I still may have the AIDS virus. And if I could never do what Rock did." And this guy lied. I screamed at the TV and I said, "This guy is a, effing liar." And, if he exposed me to the virus, if he had it, I should sue him for the same thing. Right. Somebody at the party happened to know connections to some of the people that were good friends with Rock, and they contacted me. And I was a smoking gun. They were going to reopen up the case because I was new evidence of, I didn't realize what the case was 100%. I knew it was about him lying, talk about him, Rock lying to MarcChristian about him having AIDS, which was true. He didn't tell him. But the other part of, he feared for his life because he thought he might get it and he would never be able to have a sexual life again, was absolutely made up fabrication. And so because of me and other circumstances, the judge didn't reopen up the case, but he reduced the award. My understanding is they actually, they reduced it to like $5 million, and they wanted to appeal the case, and they settled for somewhere under $3 million. And because of that, this MarcChristian went after me. He exposed me as being gay. This is the pushed out part. And I was an outrigger canoer, and I was not out to my parents or any of my clients, and I'm featured in Entrepreneur Magazine, but I was like writing for the Orange County Business Journal at the time, giving them, stories about fitness. Marcia Marengo, the owner of the Orange County Business Journal, was one of my clients. So we had this quick pro quo that I would write for her in exchange of giving her classes, and which worked well for a few years. And I got lots of clients through that. And I didn't want to jeopardize losing my clients, because even back then, even though it was a little bit better than it was in the 70s and 80s, I was scared that I was going to my clients. And I did lose some because when I said I would do this and give a deposition, they told me that they were going to put a gag order on it, and they lied to me. I didn't get it in writing. And literally my my parents, I called them up. They were the first people I called up, and they said, "Oh, the phone's been ringing nonstop." I said, "Please unplug the phone." We had landlines back then. Plug the phone. Just plug it in when you call me or whoever you want to call, because this is going to go on for a week or a couple of weeks. So just unplug it. So my mom, here she is. She had RockHudson at her house, and she asked me, "So you're not like that MarcChristian, are you?" And I, being the German translation, I go, "Was that a question, Mom, or what are you saying?" "Oh, you're not funny like he is, are you?" And I said, "Mom, I'm hilarious." I said, I'm gay. And, and she said, "Oh, no, I don't mean it. We love you." And, they were very, very supportive. My dad was very old school, but he came around. My mom, of course, being an only child, loved me and said, "We just want you to be happy, and we're just scared for you." And I said, "No, I was always safe." And, I was celibate for about 2 years during the AIDS crisis because I was too scared to be with anybody. And, a side note is I've been with my partner for 26 years. So that gives you an indication that I wasn't really a promiscuous person to begin with. But, it was that the whole AIDS thing and the MarcChristian thing left me with a sour taste in my mouth with, having to come out that way. One of the other things that happened was I was on that, like I said, an outrigger canoe team. They put MarcChristian, or I can't say it was him, but somebody that was in his team or whatever, put a note on our bulletin board saying that I had AIDS and I was there to infect the entire team. So they took me aside. I had to bring my health documents, being tested, showing that I was negative. And, it was a pretty emotional time in my life. Luckily, one of my clients' son was a lawyer, and he gave me the best advice, telling me, "Don't do interviews, don't get involved." My lawyers, I would say my lawyers, but the estate's lawyers for RockHudson were trying to get me on the Sally Raphael show and Donahue show. I'm trying to remember all the shows so many years back, but yeah, I said no. I didn't do it, because they said, "Well, you could get a book deal out of this and you could make millions." And I said, "No, not like that. I'd rather do my job and have a successful career, something that I earned, than doing this on the back of somebody's tragedy." So
yeah, and a lot of people would.
Everything got settled eventually. Yeah. So perhaps you have some questions that maybe I can fill in any gaps or anything that you may want to know.
Yeah, so you did a great job explaining your story and everything. Of course, it's your story there. But I did have a question. So what do you hope the readers take away from the book itself and from your time here today?
Well, I guess it's the old adage from William Shakespeare, "To thine own self be true." Be yourself and be proud of who you are. Don't try to change yourself for other people, because it doesn't work. I've met so many people that I know that were married at the time, but were gay and, would go and cheat on their wives and do other things, because that's what they had to do back then in order to be accepted fully. And yet they were tormented inside. They tore themselves apart. And luckily and unluckily, because things are changing back and forth with now, it's becoming a more conservative government again. And people are scared to death. They're like, "What do I do?" They've been out for so many years with the pronouns and stuff. It's just gotten a little bit kind of extreme on each end. And I think we need to find more middle ground and accept people for being who they are, and not try to read in, the worst of everything. If I'm being clear or making sense, I don't know. And that's what I'd like people to know, is just be yourself, be honest, and trust that, the people that will love you for you. I think I lost your voice. I'm sorry. Are you there?
Well, thank you for sharing all those things today, Gunther. I really appreciate it. Can you tell our audience how they can connect with you? How can they buy this book?
So my book's supposed to be at 40 different venues. I know that's already on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Also, just so people can get a sense of who I am, I've done the narrative. I've done the actual audiobook, which you can find on audiobook.com, also on Google Play and Apple Books. So pretty much there are going to be as many venues as possible. I'm not too knowledgeable about the audiobook venues, but I've had some people say, oh, well, if you go on audiobook, you have to be a member and you have to pay a monthly. But I'm sure there's places that if you already are a member of Apple or Google Play, you can just get them and get the narrative, which is 9.5 hours.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm going to put those links in the description below so the audience can connect with you, can buy that book. And don't just buy the book, review the book, because that helps our authors to get the word out there a little bit further. Well, Gunther, thank you for your time. Anything you want to leave us with today?
Well, thank you for having me on here. Just one quick note on the book. Also, with the book, the extras that you get there are photos of my parents and I in Hawaii. And what you get in the narrative version, the audiobook, is I have 3 of my original songs that I'm singing on there. So enjoy. I hope you do.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. This is the My Life Now podcast. We hope to see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening and supporting another episode of My Life Now.
Please remember to subscribe to our podcast show and share it with a friend.
Together, we can keep the message of these books alive.
Until we turn the next page together, stay classy.